world, specifically the religious Jewish world, that actually gives me the cringe a little bit sometimes. But this class sort of vindicates this term a little bit. And that term is that when somebody becomes religiously observant, the term usually is Shomer Shabbat. They are now a Shabbat observer. In literal translation, it means a guardian of Shabbat. They guard Shabbat. When in the Ten Commandments, so it mentions it twice. We have it in the portion of Yisro. We have it in the portion of V'eschanan. So in the portion of Yisro, it mentions the word Zachor. You should remember or honor the Shabbat. And in the portion of Eschanan, it says Shamor. You should guard the Shabbat. And it says that God said both those words in the same, with exactly the same time. In other words, something that no human can do, obviously. So Shomer Shabbat means the guardian, like a guardian of Shabbat. Now, what's interesting and what's puzzling about this term is that Shabbat is one mitzvah and it's one day of the week. And yet, that is the term to describe someone who is now observant of all Torah and mitzvos, or I guess the basics of Torah and mitzvos. Not like it's puzzling that that's the term. And it always bothered me because, first of all, it always bothered me because everyone keeps Shabbat different and everyone's journey to keeping Shabbat is a different journey. So it's like really weird that it's a sort of a one size fits all baseline, but that's a different discussion. But the fact that that's the mitzvah, Shabbat is the mitzvah that is like the benchmark of Torah observance is a very interesting thought or question. And we're going to understand that from this class. But more importantly, we're going to understand why Shabbat encapsulates all of the mitzvos, and most importantly, our relationship with God. That the Shabbat is I use the term in the email subject line that I'm proud that I really like, called is the escape hatch of the constraints of time. Time is a gift, it's a blessing, and time is a special thing. We respect time, but sometimes time is also a burden, like we're running out of time, or we don't have enough time, or time is flying, or whatever that is. Shabbat is the escape from whatever burden time is causing us. And we're going to understand that from this class. Why are we discussing this? Why are we discussing this now in this week's Torah class? Because in the parsha of this week is the full description of all the holidays that are called the Moadim. The Moadim in Hebrew means the designated times, or it's like it's a designated time for the holiday. And in fact, on the Torah reading that we read for most of the holidays comes from this week's parsha, for most of the holidays. So now Shabbat is also considered a moed in a sense that it's a designated time that we're meant to make holy. So we're going to talk about the idea of holiness within time because of this, the theme of the parsha, and that's the connection we're going to use. So we're going to start with some of the basics of the mitzvah, of the mitzvot. Now, so putting the question of Shabbat and time aside, because we're going to get back to that, and that's going to be the pinnacle of our lesson and the takeaway from our lesson. But as a foundational point, and this is still very important and something that's worth spending a good amount of time on, no pun intended, is the foundation of the core mitzvot and how they come about in our practice and in terms of the nature of the world evolving and the nature of society evolving. And what I mean by that is that there are some mitzvot that are designated for specific generations. And I'm going to give you an example. In the very early days of the tribes of Israel, before like when they first settled in the land of Israel, like in the very, very early days, even while they were in the desert, there was a command that they should not intermarry among the tribes. All right, we think it's bad now in terms of marrying Jewish or not, whatever. In those days, they had to marry someone in their tribe, or they were supposed to at least. And that was because of the settling of the land of Israel, that the tribes should be able to maintain their integrity when it comes to settling in the land of Israel, that they should have the right, the full tribe should be able to have to designate their family's portion. But that mitzvah was abolished because it was a time sensitive mitzvah, and there's many other mitzvot that were given. For example, putting blood on the doorpost on the night the first Passover in Egypt was a mitzvah just for that night. We're not supposed to do that every Passover, and the same goes for many other commandments, or maybe not many other, but some other commandments that were specifically designated for a specific time period. However, there are specific mitzvos that never change no matter what. And here are those 6 mitzvos that never change. And by the way, without being blunt, these 6 mitzvos kind of elaborate why there's no such thing as a new covenant or something like that, because these mitzvos are eternal from the very beginning to the very end. They'll never ever change. What are the mitzvos? Number 1, to believe in Hashem, believe in God. Number 2, not to believe in anything else besides God. Okay, so these are basics. These are the first 2 commandments. However, number 3 is another level of belief. Number 3 is to believe in his absolute oneness. Okay, this class isn't about this mitzvah, so I'm not going to go so far into it, but to summarize, this mitzvah is the idea that there is no other existence in this universe other than God. There is no other power. There is nothing other than pure godliness in this world. Everything that exists, every planet, every galaxy, every alien, if they exist, everything, every insect, everything in this world is literally a part of God and is one with God, and there is nothing outside of God. And therefore, we cannot believe that we cannot accept that there's another existence that actually has decision power outside of God. God gives us the grace of free choice, but that's because God allows us to have that, not because we are separate from God, God forbid. We are one with God. So that is a core belief in Judaism that will never, ever change. Number 4 is to love God, and number 5 is to fear God. These are 2 mitzvos that are considered to be the 2 wings. You can't have one without the other, because just like a bird can't fly with one wing, you need to have both. You have to have a love, but you also have to have a reverence for God. You need to have both in order to have a real relationship with God. And number 6 is not to stray after the feelings of the heart and the vision of the eyes, which is basically like lust and other things that might make us stray into areas we should not go. Okay. By the way, I forgot to mention, this is the book called the Sefer HaChinuch, which elaborates on the mitzvos and helps us understand the core mitzvos that the Torah elaborates. And there's a commentary called the Minchas Chinuch, which is explaining all the mitzvos in more detail. Now, among the commandments, there are those that a person is obligated to do at a specific time, and not earlier, such as the commandments to dwell in a sukkah, to wave a lulav. So, for example, if you make a blessing on the lulav and the etrog a day before Sukkot, it's not a mitzvah. In fact, if you say the blessing, you're using Hashem's name in vain, because it's not a mitzvah on the 14th day of the month of Tishrei. You're totally, I mean, you're welcome to move around the stuff, the lulav and etrog, but you're not accomplishing anything spiritual, because it is not a mitzvah, it is not a commandment, it is not a connector on that day. It's a designated commandment on the 15th of Tishrei, and only on those days from the 15th to the 21st, the 7 days, only on those days is it an actual mitzvah. The same goes for sitting in the sukkah. The same goes for all of the others. Even the Shema. The Shema that says in the Mishnah is that we're only allowed to say, that the mitzvah of saying the Shema in the morning and the evening are for the first 3 hours of the morning. And during the evening, that is when the mitzvah is to say the Shema. If we say it after the time, it's like we're reading from the Torah, which is not a bad thing to do. You could do it, but it does not accomplish the mitzvah. And the way the Alter Rebbe explains is that if you literally are a minute late in saying the Shema, So you're saying words of Torah, but the commandment to recite the Shema, which would have drawn down this awesome light from God into this world, was missed because you missed the time. So these are mitzvos that are designated to specific times. They have a set time in the year or day, and these obligations are not perpetual. They only pertain to certain times of the year or day. Now, Shabbat is one of those mitzvot. Shabbat is a mitzvah that is designated from the beginning of creation to be the seventh day of the week, as we all know. Even though the mitzvah itself wasn't given to the Jewish people officially till they were in the desert, right before the giving of the Torah, but it was already designated that that's going to be a mitzvah. So back to our original question, why is Shabbat the poster child for all of the mitzvos, for all of the observances of the Torah? When someone's Shomer Shabbat, that's how we sort of describe someone that is Torah observant, when Shabbat is a once a week mitzvah. And we know that being observant for once a week doesn't really get us to where we need to be a Torah observant Jew. You have to be Torah observant 24/7. I mean, obviously we all make mistakes and we all have our ups and downs, and that's we're human. But the idea of being Torah observant is that we strive to be 24/7 Torah observant. So why is Shabbat, which is only a 25-hour experience once a week, why is that a poster child for all the mitzvahs? That is the original question of the class. So let us explore this. This is what we talked about before about the moed, but let's explore the idea of Shabbat. I'm going to skip this text. This is we'll get back to it maybe. Let's understand something about what Shabbat does, specifically Shabbat more than a holiday, even though we're gonna mix them together a little bit. But let's talk about the idea of Shabbat itself and what it does for our week and how it actually stands above the limits of the 25 hours that we celebrated. So actually, let's go back to that verse from King Solomon. Let's see what he says. Oh, sorry, from King David. So this is from Tehillim. I inherited your testimony forever, for they are the joy of my heart. So what is the testimony? What does that mean? Testimony is the Torah, obviously. Specifically also the oral Torah as well, because the oral Torah is meant to be communicated as part of the narration of the Torah. So the idea that the oral Torah explains is that there are certain parameters when it comes to the mitzvos being designated in times. One is called zmanim, and one is called moed. So let us explain this a little bit. They're both, so the Shema, for example, saying the Shema the first 3 hours of the day is a zman thing. It's designated time. Lighting Shabbos candles is a designated time. You're supposed to do it within a certain period of time. But it's not limited. The idea of saying the Shema has an influence on the whole day, and the idea of lighting Shabbos candles has an influence on the whole night of Shabbos. In fact, one of the main reasons why we light Shabbos candles is to prevent someone from slipping or tripping on something that's in the house, to bring peace to the home. I know that sounds mundane, but that's one of the things mentioned in the Code of Jewish law. So it's not just about the few minutes that you light the Shabbat candles, it's what happens afterwards. The same as with saying the Shema. You say the Shema in the morning and the evening because you're setting the tone for your day, and you're setting the tone for the night as far as your commitment to Hashem and your commitment to the Torah. Moed has another level of connection to time. Moed is the idea that God designated a day, that this day is going to be the day of the Exodus. In fact, we don't celebrate the day of Pesach because that happened to be the day that the Exodus occurred. When Hashem created the world, and within the world, within creation, he created time as well, because time did not exist. The limits of time did not exist before creation. And when he created the calendar, like when he created the existence of time, he designated the day, the 15th of Nisan, to be the day of the Exodus. That was a designation. So it's meant to be a designated special day for Exodus. In fact, the night of Pesach is called the Leil Shimurim, the night of guardianship, where God guards the people, and we have a promise for all generations that God is going to guard us on that night. Well, guess what? In the morning when we wake up, that special moment is over. Doesn't mean that we don't take energy or spiritual. Of course we do. But the designated experience the designated holiness of that night is over. What we're going to say about Zmanim is that it has a deeper influence on the rest of the time around us versus the Moed, which let's go into right now. So, explaining what the pasuk from David HaMelech says. Your testimonials are like inheritance to me, meaning that I am locked into them just as we are perpetually locked into our inheritance. There is never a time where I depart from them and don't abide by them. Let's explain this further. All year long, we are obligated to fast on Yom Kippur. From the day we become Jewish adults, we are bound to waving a lulav for dwelling in a sukkah during Sukkot. The obligation is constant, though the actual observance is only kept during the festival. So the label time-bound commandments, which distinguishes occasional rituals from continuous commandments, only pertains to their actual performance. Their obligations, however, are continual, equally binding before, during, and after their respective time slots. Hold on a minute. We're going to explain this. So the performance is time sensitive. The obligation is not. But there's more to this. There are certain influences and impact that we can expect from specific mitzvos that are time sensitive, that could actually take us on a different level, and do take us on a different level beyond the time limit experience. And Shabbat is one of them. So let's take a look at what the Rambam says about Shabbos. It is a mitzvah to honor Shabbos by bathing our faces, hands. Faces is a wrong translation. It says lerchetz panav, to wash your face, hands, feet, and hot water on Friday. By the way, in the days of whatever this was, 1,000 years ago, people did not take showers that often. And the Jewish community consistently would always shower on a Friday. They always go to the bathhouse and shower on a Friday. And that actually helped prevent them from many diseases that would sometimes people would get because of the lack of hygiene that existed. The idea of consistent weekly, I know it sounds gross to us now to take a shower once a week, but back then, taking a shower once a week was actually considered very hygienic. He goes on, we wrap ourselves in tzitzit and sit with proper respect, waiting to receive Shabbat as one would go out to greet a king. We wear clean garments to honor Shabbat. Ezra, the prophet, who helped bring the Jewish people back into the land of Israel after the first exile, ordained that we do laundry on Thursday in honor of Shabbos. In other words, we're not supposed to do it on Friday. We should do it on Thursday, so that way on Friday we could focus on the food and other preparations of Shabbos. We must set our table on Friday and clean the house during the day in honor of Shabbos. There must be a candle and a set table and a couch bedecked with spreads for all these elements to honor Shabbos. Even a distinguished person who is not in the habit of making purchases in the market or performing menial tasks at home must prepare the Shabbos for Shabbos in person. And the Talmud actually gives many examples of what some of the greatest sages, even the ones that were very wealthy and had many servants, what they would do on their own to help prepare for Shabbos, starting from Thursday. In fact, in many Jewish communities, already Thursday night is the famous marketplaces are open to sell Shabbos food because you're already preparing for Shabbos. What we're going to start to see now is a trend of how Shabbos encapsulates not just the 25 hours of Shabbos, just from a physical point, not even from a spiritual point. It starts to encapsulate our lives and impact our lives already from Thursday to everything else that happens between Thursday and after Shabbos, without even going further. But now let's go further, we'll see even more. Our earliest sages, some chopped wood for cooking, some cooked some salted meat, some braided wicks, some kindled lamps. Others went out and purchased food and beverages for Shabbos. though this was not their ordinary practice. So, by the way, I just want to share as a personal note, when I was 8 years old, my the Charlotte Jewish Day School only went until third grade. So my parents sent me to Michigan, to continue Jewish in a Jewish school, and I lived at my grandparents' house. My grandfather, my mother's father, is probably the most he's probably the most a very non-materialistic guy. Like he wouldn't know how to cook to save his life. My dad's dad is a different story. He's much more down to earth, totally different story. But my mom's dad is completely not. But on Friday, he would always set the table. He would do a terrible job, but he always did it. And he would always set up the candles. And not only that, he would light each candle beforehand to make the wicks like come out like be like easier to light for later. And he taught me how to do that. I was a little kid, I was 8 years old. And then he would also do a few the things that he knew how to do, he would always do them on Friday. And he always told me that this is, you always have to be involved in something in preparation for Shabbat. I know that's not like a amazing story or whatever, but it had an impact on me that on Friday, even if you have help and even if you don't need to, you have to be involved in the process of setting your house up for Shabbos. So let's go on. The Alter Rebbe writes in his explanation of the Code or his version of the Code of Jewish law, our sages declared a mitzvah to cut our hair on the day before a Jewish festival, so we don't enter the festival unkempt. It is also a mitzvah to bathe in hot water, wash our hair with soap, and trim our nails on the day before a festival, as it is before Shabbat. It is also a mitzvah to knead bread at home the day before a festival to honor the festival, as it is on Friday to honor Shabbat. How does one bring joy to one's family during the festivals? We distribute treats to the children and provide finery and jewelry to the women, as we can afford. And during the temple era, men ate meat from the peace offerings to be joyful. Today, since the temple is not standing, the obligation to be joyful can only be fulfilled by drinking wine. So that's why we make Kiddush on wine, is because we want to elevate the wine and make it holy. So there are specific physical mitzvos that have to be done, and that means the preparation has to be done as well. Now, there's a beautiful Hayom Yom that actually tells us that Shabbat doesn't just begin on Thursday; it actually begins on Wednesday. Now, how do we know this? Before we even read this text, if you look in the Song of the Day, so if you look at Wednesday's Song of the Day, the Psalm, the last three verses is L'chun. It's a clip of the clip of the three verses that we say. It's from three verses from Psalm, I believe 95, but I might be wrong. Or sorry, basically it's the three verses that we say to start the Friday night services on Shabbat. Basically telling us on Wednesday that we really need to start thinking about Shabbat. So here's how the Rebbe writes about it in Hayom Yom. On Wednesday, a Jew wonders, how will I make Shabbat? This is not just a concern about material provisions, but also about spiritual provisions. On Shabbat, a Jew is more spiritual, and we grow despondent as we wonder where's the inspiration might come from. So what happens? On Wednesday, the solution is to sing and trust that God will provide, because the verse L'chun that is included in the Song of the Day of Wednesday starts L'chun, let's go praise Hashem, that trusting in Hashem will provide. And what does the Song of the Day say on Thursday? However, on Thursday, as Shabbat draws closer and inspiration has yet to strike, it becomes harder to sing. We realize that we must do something to generate the Shabbat inspiration. So on Thursday night, we sit down and study Chassidus, and this brings about the inspiration. And on Friday, we appreciate God's profundity. I'm not sure what that word means, but in Hebrew, it means that we appreciate God's revelation or God's teachings, or glory, and glorious majesty. And with this, we render, and then for this, we bring Shabbat in. In other words, on Wednesday, we start the process of trying to trust God that God will send us the inspiration. On Thursday, we realize that we have to work for it. And when we work for it on Friday, we finally have the inspiration and we're able to bring in Shabbat that we were meant to bring Shabbat. Point is that already Wednesday the 3 days before Shabbat, we're already in the mode of Shabbat. So already half the week is part of Shabbat. There's a point that we're getting to. Now, there's the after Shabbat that comes. And the Alter Rebbe is going to explain this with the three pilgrimages the three main holidays the Jewish people would go to the Holy Temple for in Jerusalem. When the Jews made their three annual pilgrimages to the Holy Temple for the festivals, Hashem was revealed, and they would bow down to Hashem, and their souls experienced the sublimation. They were nullified before Hashem's will. They had no yearning or desire except for what Hashem desired. And every Jew, each according to their capacity, saw and internalized Hashem when visiting the Holy Temple. And their experience from these three visits every year would linger and infuse them with energy after the pilgrimage for the rest of the year. And they would experience and last until the next festival, until the next pilgrimage. But what do we do now that we don't have a holy temple? So now the holy temple has been destroyed. We can no longer come and bow down before Hashem. Nevertheless, a glimmer of the sacred revelation and submission to Hashem can be experienced during our festivals, which is a similar idea of Shabbos, in our synagogues and study halls during prayer, when the Jewish people connect to Hashem and strive for the holistic sublimation, each according to their capacity. So what the Alter Rebbe is saying is that we could still tap into that level of revelation on Shabbat and the holidays, even in our exile when we don't have the Holy Temple. So let's now go to the core of Shabbat, of why we have this day in the first place, and why it's taking up already half of our week. Soon we're going to see how it's taking up our whole week, but right now we're just at the half of the week. So first of all, we know that God, Hashem doesn't need any rest. Hashem is infinite. All Hashem has to do is decide he wants a world, and there's a world exactly the way he wants it. When Hashem thinks, for us humans, when we think, it says that if you have, I just actually saw this motivational video, that if you have dreams without goals, they're just going to be dreams. If you have goals without plans, they're just going to be goals. If you have plans without consistent effort or consistent work or consistent execution, it's just going to be, plans on a paper. In other words, for us humans, we have to put everything into action, and we have to make it work, and we have to be consistent and all. For Hashem, all Hashem has to do is just decide this is what he wants, and it happens. God says, let there be light, or let there be this, and it happens exactly the way he wants it. It's beyond our comprehension. We're not even supposed to think about, because to us, it's not even possible to comprehend. We have to marvel at it, and appreciate the greatness of it, but at the same time, we'll never understand how Hashem is able to do that. Now, so why does Hashem need a Shabbos? Why does he need a day of rest? And why did he create that? And more importantly, why does Hashem want us to have that day of rest? I mean, yeah, of course, it's a nice thing, but what's the source, not the source, but what's the compulsion behind this idea that Hashem wants us to join him and rest on Shabbos, that this is so important? Not just saying, hey, by the way, it's a good idea to take a day off, but I rested on Shabbos. God said, I rested on Shabbos, and now I need you to rest on Shabbos too. So there's the idea of connection that happens here. So when the mitzvah of Shabbos was given, this is from the verse, it says, it is an eternal sign between me and the children of Israel, that Hashem made the heavens and earth in 6 days and ceased and rested on the seventh. Hashem wanted partners in the creation. He didn't want the creation to be his own. That's why he created one of each, or one couple of each, because he wanted them to procreate, because he wanted them to be partners with him in the creation of populating the world. And the same goes for the spiritual population, or the spiritual connection and creation. Hashem wanted us to be partners. And what method or what vehicle did Hashem choose for us to be partners as a core piece of this partnership? Is the Shabbat, is the seventh day, is the day of rest. Not only that, but by resting on Shabbos, we're testifying, and by keeping Shabbat, we are testifying that Hashem created the world. So not only so by keeping Shabbat, we're basically bearing witness that Hashem created the world, and not only that, but the verse that we say, the few verses that we say, that known as the Vayechulu, that we say on Friday night in the Kiddush, but also in the prayers. We say it during the Amidah, but we also say it right after the Amidah. We say it during Kiddush, the Vayechulu. It says that one who says this verse, these few verses, it says literally as if you partnered with God, as if you were God's business partner in creating the world, just by saying those verses. It's all part of the same idea of honoring the Shabbat, because you are now becoming a partner and a witness, not just a witness, but a partner with God in the creation of the world. And this is the conduit, this is the vehicle, this is the day, and this is how Hashem chose for us to be his partners. How does this play out? How and why does this play out in this partnership? Usually a partnership is two entities or two individuals, each contributing something unique to a partnership, and equal or unequal, whatever. The point is, there's two things coming together, and the fusion of the partnership creates something really great. So what is the fusion of this partnership that's happening when we keep Shabbat and we become Hashem's partners in creation? So there's a bunch of interesting thoughts and commentaries on what happens when we keep Shabbos and what we have to go through to keep Shabbos, and why, ultimately, to answer our original question, why this is the poster child of the observance of all the mitzvos. So one of those stories is one that we have over here. And I'm not going to read this story. I'd rather tell a different story. This story is about a young man who describing what it was like to have to disconnect from everything and how to like not have any technology and not scroll their phone, and how hard it was of it, but eventually it became like a very positive experience for them. It's a nice little thing, but I'd rather share. I'll leave it on the screen while I share my story. I'd rather share a story of self-sacrifice when many Jewish people immigrated to the United States. Saturday is a normal work day, and finding work that does not include Saturday was almost impossible. And many Jews unfortunately caved to the demands of working on Shabbos, and it was very, very hard not to. And there was one individual that would literally work every week from Sunday or Sunday or Monday, whenever the business would open, until Friday. And then Friday, he would say that I can't come on Saturday because it's Shabbos, and he would be fired. And he would get another job, and he would work from company to company. And that's how he would try to support himself. And sometimes he would not find a job for that week, and his family would go hungry. In other words, he was basically stuck. But he kept Shabbos, and he made sure to keep Shabbos, and he suffered tremendously. He and his family, eventually, I think he started his own business. But the point is, for many years, it was a very big sacrifice to keep Shabbos. Many years later, his grandchild was studying in medical school, and eventually became a resident doctor. That's part of the medical school process. I guess once you become a doctor, you have to do your residency. And residency is basically spending a whole lot of time as a doctor in a hospital where you don't get too much break, because you're really meant to experience what it's like to be in a hospital as much time as possible. You get the most experience, and you can't really pick your hours, as far as I understand. And this resident was basically being forced to work on Shabbos, and all he could think about was how his grandfather sacrificed so much to keep Shabbos, and he couldn't bring himself, even though he himself wasn't so observant, but he couldn't bring himself to take a job on Shabbos. So what he would do is he would bribe other residents to take his shift with like $1,000 or more. He didn't have any money yet. He didn't have that much money yet, but he would always find ways to bribe or to trade shifts, and he would like bribe his fellow residents to take a shift. And he would work extra hard on Sundays and nights, and other times he would work so hard during the rest of his residency. And he eventually he made it through. And when he finally like finished his residency or fellowship or whatever it took to become a proper doctor, he gave a speech to say, when my grandfather would tell these stories about how hard it was to keep Shabbos, you know, for me, it was like we had Friday night, we would eat fish and cholent and this and that. Like, it was there was no sacrifices. So, like to me, like keeping Shabbos wasn't what you have to close your phone. Like it's hard for some people, but really, like, what's the sacrifice? I didn't really understand what the sacrifice was, and now I finally feel the connection with my grandfather because I know what it's like to have to sacrifice. And obviously, each on their own level. I'm not necessarily comparing situations, but he did have to sacrifice, and he did have to work really, really hard to make it work in order not to violate Shabbos. Um, why are there are so many of these stories, but why are these stories so important? Because the idea of Shabbos for us wasn't about rest. It never was about rest. The day of rest is a nicety. It's a fringe benefit for someone who is able to afford it, to afford the luxury of rest. It was never about rest. It's about testimony. It's about testimony that we are committed to doing what Hashem asks us to do, whether it makes sense or not, or whether it's convenient or not. Um, the biggest test of time comes when there really isn't a convenience. So, like for me, and this is not a big sacrifice, so I'm not telling the story to brag. I'm telling the story because it's a fun experience in my mind of of being able to having the opportunity to sacrifice for Shabbos. So many years ago, there was, I think it was 2010, there was a big voting competition for schools to vote on Facebook in 2010. Facebook was still a big deal. And Rabbi Levin from Valentine and myself were in Chapel Hill for weeks. We were getting votes, and the voting ended on Friday night. So we stayed on Friday till about Friday afternoon, and we gave ourselves about 3.5 hours to make it back before Shabbos. Or we gave ourselves enough time, but there was heavy traffic, and we only made it back to the university area, to the North Carolina, to the Charlotte UNC Charlotte area, and we walked. By sundown, we just locked our keys in the car. We locked everything in the car, and we walked from there back to this part of town in Charlotte. I don't remember how many miles it was. It took us several hours after a whole day, in the heat. Um, it was definitely an experience. But what was special about it, and honestly, compared to what our ancestors had to do to sacrifice for Shabbos, is nothing. So I'm saying again, this is not a brag, but what's special about it is the ability to sacrifice for Shabbos reminds us that Shabbos has always been about a testimony. It's always been about when it's not convenient, and gives us the ability to show that this is our connection to Hashem. This is the evidence that our connection to Hashem and our partnership with Hashem goes above and beyond the convenience and the simplicity of just doing what is easy for us and what makes sense to us, but also going above and beyond. Now, what happens after Shabbos? We make Havdalah. All right, as it's pictured on the screen, you make Havdalah, you fill up another glass of wine. Some people do it on tea, orange juice. You can do it on any drink that's considered a special drink. And we light a candle, and we also smell spices because part of our Shabbat soul, the Shabbat part of our soul is leaving, so we want to comfort it. Now, an interesting fun fact. If somebody forgets to make Havdalah, technically the custom is that we don't eat anything after Shabbat is over until we make Havdalah, eat or drink anything till after Havdalah. But let's say somebody forgets to make Havdalah. Do you know that they have until Tuesday of the following week to make Havdalah, to end the Shabbat? Shabbat's over, but you're allowed to do work before Havdalah. You're allowed to. There's a little verse that we say, Baruch Hamav L'Mekadosh L'Chol, blessed is the one who separates from holiness to mundane, and then you can do whatever you want. But in other words, whatever you want that you do during the week. But you're supposed to still make Havdalah, and if you don't, you have until Tuesday to do so. Why until Tuesday? And here is the interesting fact. By remembering Shabbat when it ends, the Rebbe says, its memory extends into the coming week. By remembering the holiness of Shabbat as we enter the mundane week and leave Shabbat behind, we remember Shabbat throughout the week. Shabbat actually extends into the following week. And that's why if Havdalah is forgotten on Saturday night, it may be said until Tuesday, but not after Tuesday, because, as the Alter Rebbe writes, the first 3 days of the week follow the previous Shabbos. They're influenced by the previous Shabbos. They are like the long Saturday night. However, the last 3 days of the week gear up for the following Shabbos, and not tied to the previous Shabbos. What does this tell us? The entire week is Shabbos. The entire week is connected to either the previous Shabbat or the following Shabbat, which is so interesting, because we're basically constantly influenced by this testimony of God created the world and we are a part of it and we are his partners in creation. In fact, the commandment in the 10 commandments to keep Shabbat, how does the Torah say this commandment to us? It doesn't start off by keeping the Shabbat. Oh, sorry, it does start off, but it does. In the description of the commandment, it says, Sheishes Yamim Tavod, you should work for 6 days. That's part of the commandment, is that you should work with the world, work with the physical world, elevate the physical world, and then on Shabbat, you should make it holy. So it's not just that the 6 days of the week are nothing or are not important. They are, because they're all part of this journey of connecting the world to godliness and using that inspiration that comes from Shabbos. Whether it's the Shabbos before or the preparation of the Shabbos coming that's coming ahead of you. Interestingly, also, if you look at the way we say the song of the day in the morning prayers, if you look at the way we introduce the song of the day. So, for example, today is Thursday. What do we say? Hayom Yom Chamishi. Today is the 5th day b'Shabbos. Today is the 5th day leading up to Shabbos. On Sunday, we say Hayom Yom Rishon b'Shabbos. This is the 1st day of Shabbos. Every day is about the day of the week in relation to Shabbos. So it's not that the other days of the week don't matter, but we are constantly influenced by the fact that our connection to Hashem is through the testimony of Shabbos. Why is that? This is because the divine light in our soul is entirely unconstrained by the limits of time. It transcends, dominates, and overrules time. From Hashem's perspective, the connection we make with him is eternal, because Hashem and his desire transcends the boundary of time. And that is reflected in Shabbos. So even though technically the rules and restrictions of Shabbos are limited or confined to a specific day, a 25-hour day, I'm saying 25 because we start at sunset and we end at nightfall for the next day. So it's really 25 hours. However, the influence is infinite, because we are drawing down a level of godliness that transcends time. And that's hinted in the fact that it influences our whole week. And therefore, Shabbat becomes the escape hatch for the negativity associated with time, and turns that into a positivity, turns the time into an opportunity versus a time is flying. It turns the feeling of time that we're out of time, or the headache of everything flying at you, into, we have this gift, we're partners in Hashem for creation, we're here for a reason. Everything we do in this world is connecting the world with Hashem. It's all part of us being as partners in creation, which is an infinite connection that transcends time. And that comes through each mitzvah. Interestingly, by the way, because the mitzvah of tefillin is on the screen, the men do not put on tefillin on Shabbat. Does anyone know why? So I'm gonna go back. Not because there's something wrong with tefillin or because it's too hard. It's because whatever tefillin accomplishes during the week, Shabbat accomplishes by itself. And you do not need the tefillin. It's redundant. The day itself accomplishes it. In other words, the holiness of the day accomplishes what tefillin would accomplish on any other day. And that is transcending. It transcends the physical elevation that we're trying to do during the week. It transcends it all. And it helps elevate us through that. And that's why when Shabbos comes in, even if we're stressed and even if we have a lot on our plate, and even we're supposed to imagine as if all of our work is done. It says that when Shabbos starts, we're supposed to just understand that that we're in Hashem's hands. Our work is done. We put our problems aside. We don't worry about it, because now we're in God's hands. Was someone asking you a question? Sorry. The Rebbe continues, although the obligation of Shabbat is on the person, in other words, a person has this obligation to keep Shabbos rather than the mitzvah performed by the person has a profound impact on the time it is performed. The moment of the mitzvah becomes a sacred moment. Moreover, our mitzvah influences time itself. Not only do we perform a mitzvah that is bound to a sacred moment, such as a festival, but we also uplift time itself, where the time starts to become infinite. All of time, even mundane days and moments that are not part of Shabbos and the festivals, are sanctified and actually become infinite moments, and now are living in the infinite and start to become revealed as infinite moments, which is very important because when Mashiach comes, those moments will reactivate. We're always taught that this minute will never come back, or this minute is forever gone. But it's not so true, because when Mashiach comes, those minutes that we've turned into those holy minutes through our mitzvos will actually become reactivated. We'll be able to appreciate them and see how we've turned them into holiness, because now they're infinite minutes. So now that's why the Rambam refers to these specific mitzvos as eternal, because they actually have the potential to transform everything into infinite mitzvos, infinite time. And that's why the Shomer Shabbat concept is a general concept, not just about Shabbat, but it's the entire connection and the bearing witness to Hashem's creation of the world, and also reflection of our connection and partnership with Hashem to do the mitzvos in this world, and gives us the ability to elevate the world. So here on the screen we have the levels of impact. Number one, Shabbos is a mitzvah that exists all the time, even if we only do it on a specific day. And it also influences the days before Shabbos and after Shabbos. And if we apply what happens on Shabbos, or what Shabbos means, it actually goes well beyond the specific time and place. And when we do a mitzvah that's limited to a specific time, we actually elevate that moment into an infinite moment that transcends time. So let us hope. It says that if the Jewish people keep even one Shabbos, Mashiach will come. So let's hope. Why? Because if we do that, then we bring the world to a state of perfection. So let us hope that we could finally do that. Maybe even before Shabbos, we could already accomplish that and bring the world to the state of perfection with the coming of Mashiach. Thank you all so much, and Shabbat Shalom.
Thank you. Good